welcome to Moments with Marianne. I'm so delighted we're spending this time here today. We have a very inspiring show coming right up with Maureen St Germain, and she's here today to talk to us about her new book, Waking Up in 5D. Now, Maureen has over 25 years of experience in the area of metaphysics and sacred traditions. Known as the practical mystic, Maureen is a prolific teacher and facilitator of spiritual knowledge and contemporary life. So let's welcome to the show, Maureen.
Thank you for having me.
What a pleasure it is to have you here, my goodness, and what a profound book. Once I picked it up, I could not put it down.
Cool.
It's always good to get that kind of feedback, right?
Yes, it is. And, this book was a long time in the making, and I got to a point where I just kind of froze and couldn't go any further. And then when I was teaching an Akashic Records class, one of the students came to me and she said, you probably know this, I'm kind of embarrassed to tell you, but I was told when I was with the Akashic Records that I should tell you that the reason your book isn't finished is because you don't have all the information yet.
And I love getting that inspiration. Oh my goodness.
It was reassuring because I was stuck, and we all have, those of us who are writers, when you get stuck like that, you're worried, did the muse dry up or what, so, yeah, that was very reassuring, and more information came through that was abundantly clear that needed to be there, so that it worked out great.
Oh my goodness. Well, and what a fabulous book. And before we get too ahead of ourselves, I'd love for you to share with us, for listeners that are new to you, just how you got started on this path. Because I know you're touted as the practical mystic for very good reasons. And I'd love for you to share with us just how you got started on this path.
I think I've always been on this path. I've always been very intuitive. When I was a child, I knew that there were beings who were watching me, keeping an eye on me. I knew some of them were, good guys and some of them weren't. And my mother also was psychic, and so I studied all the things that people study. For example, I grew up Catholic, but then I got involved in the Unity Church movement and that whole scene in the Ascended Masters, and then I got involved in the Edgar Cayce study group, and that was very, very helpful. And then more recently, I was on the board of directors of the Edgar Cayce Center in New York, and so, all of these things kind of pushed me forward. And then at a certain point, I got a very clear direction that I should learn the Merkaba, the original 17-breath Merkaba. And so I did, and right away I knew I was going to teach it. And so I got certified. I was in the last class that was certified by Drumblow, and began teaching it and taught it for almost 20 years. And got invited to lots and lots of places to bring that material forward. And along the way, because I was so interested in sacred geometry, then I wrote a book on manifestation using sacred geometry. And then I wrote a book on meditation techniques that came through me as I taught the original Merkaba. And so those books were out there for quite some time, and I was teaching from those materials. And then I began to realize that the general public was finally ready for the Ascension information. And so that's how I began writing this book. And it's interesting because I was given the name in the dream time, Waking Up in 5D, and it's kind of funny, it was in a dream and I woke up in 5D, but...
Well, and for our listeners that are new, what is 5D? Because some of them may go, well, gosh, that sounds really interesting, because you're right, there's so many people that are just clamoring for this information.
Yes. Some people call it the Ascension, and originally, a lot of people were waiting for this big event called the Ascension or the Rapture, and I began to see that we were already sliding into 5D, not realizing it. And my big aha came one day when I've been teaching about the higher dimensions, and I would ask, where did my sunglasses go? And I was always told it was in a higher dimension. And I thought initially, well, we're all going to be in a higher dimension at some point. Maybe this is just practice. Like when we send monkeys into space or something. But then one day, I had two experiences. The first one was my 16-year-old son, one of my sons, came home at age 16, threw his book bag on the floor, put something in the book bag, came in the kitchen to tell me some story, and then he said, "Here, Mom, I'll show you what I'm talking about." And he goes back to the book bag, and the item he had just put in there was not there. And he looks at me with this wild look, and he says, "Mom, I just put it in here." And I said, "I know, I saw you do it." So now he tears everything apart in the book bag, and it's still not there. So I said, "Well, put everything back, and we'll just ask for it to come back." Because I had been telling my students, if your stuff is in a higher dimension, just ask for it to come back, and it will. So he finishes his story, and I say, "Okay, now go look again." And sure enough, the missing item was right there on top. That's when I knew for sure I wasn't making it up. And then the second thing that happened was when I asked, "What's going on?" instead of me being told that my stuff was in a higher dimension, I was told, "Maureen, you were in a higher dimension when you put it down." And I thought, if I'm doing it, so is everybody else. And so I started asking in my classes. And 80-90% of the people were reporting, "Yeah, that's happened to me." And so then I can say, "Yeah, you've been fifth dimensional." Isn't that cool?
Well, and so many of us can remember doing exactly that, where we put something down and we know exactly where we left it, we come back and it's gone. And we don't have squirrels living with us or little children running around grabbing our things running off, so it's like, where did it go?
Exactly. And see, this goes back to something else. As I began to teach, one of the things that I did is I asked my higher self to teach me what I needed to know to teach the students so that they could get the optimal information. And one of the things that got brought to my attention was through another mistake. And my car was making a funny noise. My son was driving it. I was sitting in the front seat. And I said, "What's going on with the car?" And as soon as I said it, I announced out loud, like I was a mechanic. And I burst out laughing because there was no way I knew those things. So then, in meditation, I said, "How come I knew that and I don't know other stuff?" And I was told, you asked the question, "What's going on?" Now, as I began to explore this in meditation, I realized, the 6 interview questions that we all learned in 5th grade, who, what, why, when, where, and how, those are all asking for information so we can solve a problem, except for what. So who took the cookies, when were they taken, why were they taken? You start to examine this and you realize every one of those takes us up to the second last thing, and that is a piece of information so we can take action to solve it. But when you ask the what question, you get the full story of really what was going on. And that was the big aha. So then I began to teach the students, whenever they ask their higher self a question, anytime something happens that you don't understand, if you don't understand, what you do is you say to your higher self, "What's going on?" And what happens is you've now given full birth, you're open to receive, and you will receive the big answer rather than the narrow one. If you say, "Where are the cookies?" Well, they're in your son's stomach. Well, why were they taken? Well, because he was hungry, or there weren't any other snacks. You've got lots of stuff. All of these are like solution mode except for the what, and the what seeks to know.
I love how you have that separated, because a lot of times, and I've heard this said before, and you put it so well, it's, the answers are based on the quality of our questions. So, asking these broader questions, we're going to get a broader answer more than the cookies on your son's stomach.
Yes. And that was such a cool thing, because I'll bet you I had asked, where did my, whether the crystal or my sunglasses, whatever it was, where did it go? And it would always be given this, it's in the higher dimension kind of an answer. But when I said the what question, the answer was profound. And because I was teaching it to all the students, this is the question to focus on. When something happens that defies explanation, don't fill in the blank. Instead, ask the what question. So one day, when something had disappeared, and my practice was to ask where were they, because that was what I had been doing all along. So even though I was teaching everyone to use the what question when something happened that defied explanation, I was expecting, the higher dimensional answers. So, but because I was in this new practice of always asking what, instead of asking, where did my stuff go, I said, what's going on? And that's when I got the message, Maureen, you were in the higher dimension. So even I got taught by my guidance on how to ask.
I love that. And for people who are, maybe they're just coming into a spiritual practice or their spirituality, are they too experiencing the the fifth dimension?
I think so. And this is another thing that some people have trouble understanding, but I've always been given really great metaphors. When I was in school, it was way before there was a lot of use of computers, and when we wanted to do a research paper, we went to the library, we rolled our fingers through that card deck, so we picked out the books we wanted, then we tried to find if they were in this library or another library, and we would go through a lot of process researching where to get the book so we could get the research. But today, you can go online, the system will recommend books for that subject. You can, have your local library drop all the books, even if they're in other libraries, they'll put them all in one location and you pick them up in that location. And that research is the same as my research, only I had to do a lot more legwork. So what's happening is that the work you and I do are actually, like we're the ratio is at the front of the curve, and we're going through more effort. But once the path has been opened, and like in a forest, once the path has been cut, then anyone can follow that path and get that information really fast. And I am noticing that there's lots and lots of people who are opening up really fast, and then they're in these situations, and then they're like, what do I do with all this information, and how do I deal with it? And so these are tools that allow a person to have the ability to understand. So I highly recommend people develop their higher self connection, and that's one of the things that I tell people, use the protocol that I have been the conduit of developing, and learn the higher self connection this way. And it's a very simple process, and it's 6 weeks long, and you go through a process of asking unimportant questions for 6 weeks, and there's a little, set of guidelines that you follow. And at the end of 6 weeks, you have accuracy. And then some people will say to me, well, I have a pretty good higher self-connection. I don't think I need that. And my response is, okay, do you follow yourself 100% higher self 100% of the time? No. Then you need it, because you don't trust it. When you know from all the practice you've done, so what happens is, when you do this kind of practice, what happens is you develop at the egoic level the ability to know that your higher self is always right. How do you make decisions? We're always using the history, our history or someone else's. If you don't have the history, let's say on a certain car or something, you go online, you get someone else's version of the history, but it's always past tense. It's always someone else's story or your story, but it isn't based on the current status quo. And so one of the things that I did is I said, okay, I hang out with a lot of linear people. I want a way to explain to people how important the higher self connection is. And I need a really tangible example of what that's like. So I meditated on this for 3-4 months. And one day the answer came in and it made me laugh out loud. And the answer was, think of a time that you're watching TV and you're on a network, a network in your community, so it's a local network. And the weatherman comes on, or the weatherwoman comes on and says to you, there's a hailstorm or there's high winds or whatever it is. And you need to move the car into the garage or close up your windows or whatever you do to protect yourself from that weather. That is the same as the higher self information. So once you develop the higher self connection, you've given permission to your higher self to come in and tell you stuff that you need to know that you didn't know you needed to know, just like the weatherman. Isn't that cool?
That is the coolest thing. And you know what? And it just makes sense because when you ask for that information, it comes in.
Exactly. But I'll give you a couple of simple examples. Early on, when I developed this protocol, and again, I made a very clear request to my higher self so that I could help others because I wanted to be really, really good at helping others get this connection. So one day, I'm still working in the corporate world at this point, and I was trying to reach a newspaper reporter because I worked for a nonprofit, and part of my job was this publicity stuff. And I bet you I called him 2 or 3 times, and I couldn't get through. And so I just kind of let it go. And then, at the end of the day, my higher self comes in and says, call the guy. And I remember arguing with my higher self. No, I'm trying to get out of here. It's 5 o'clock. Call the guy. Really? Yes, call the guy now. So I did. He answers, and he says to me, Maureen, how did you know I would be here at this time? I am never here at this time. Not only that, but my story got on the front page of that newspaper above the news of the Pope coming to town.
Oh my goodness, where are you? You gotta love that.
Hilarious. And then another time, and this is really wild, I was driving down the highway on an interstate, and a semi goes past me, and it's dark and it's late, and I don't normally drive super fast at night. So this semi passes me, and I get a very clear message, jump in to the slipstream or the airfoil, behind the truck, which means he's going to be using more gas and I'm going to be using less, which is not a cool thing to do. So I thought, that's crazy. And I said to my higher self, are you sure? Is this my higher self telling me blah, blah, blah? Yes, do it now. So I did. And then we were coming up on an interchange, and I knew I was going to take the interchange, and so I wondered what was going to happen with the truck. Well, the truck was going the same way I was going. So when we started on the interchange, I asked again, am I to stay with him? Yes, stay right there behind him. Okay. Well, then the truck moved over to the berm, and we're still doing 60 miles an hour. And I asked again, am I to move over with him? Yes, get over now. Another car came the wrong way. I would have had a head-on collision.
Oh my goodness. It's so amazing how spirit guides us sometimes, I swear.
Yeah. And for me, I tell people, you don't always have to like what your higher self says. You don't always have to agree with your higher self. But I highly recommend you do what your higher self says. And when I teach it to people, I'll say, after 6 weeks, for the 6 weeks you're bound to follow it because it's kind of like learning a language. You don't mess with other languages, and you really stay in the real strong focus, like if you're in an immersion program. And then, after the 6 weeks, if you don't want to follow your higher self, don't. But you'll only do it once. Because you'll see very clearly how accurate your higher self was. And my not following my higher self the one time was when I was going to meet up with some friends that I hadn't seen in ages. I was visiting in New York at the time, and it was my only chance to see these people that I really, really, really liked. And they said, we're going to an art film. If you want to tag along, great, but we're not changing our plans. And I said, okay. And I asked my higher self, and my higher self said no. So I thought, well, it's just an art film. I want to see these people. So I went anyway. The art film was a dog. I wanted to leave. We came out of the theater, and I said to my friends, did you like that film? No, we thought it was horrible. We wanted to leave, but we didn't want to hurt your feelings.
Little did they know, right?
So, one of the things about this particular book is that it validates a lot of experiences that people are having. And here's the thing. When we have an experience that doesn't add up, normally we dismiss it. And we say, that doesn't fit the paradigm. And you don't logically come through those steps. That doesn't fit the paradigm. What you do is you say, well, that's weird, or that's odd, and you forget about it. But what if all your, quote, odd experiences were real, and everyone else is having them, and no one's talking about them either? And that's what's been happening.
Well, and I'm sure you have tons of people coming to you and saying, gosh, this is exactly what's happening to me.
I do. In fact, I had a class this past weekend, and everyone in the class said, yeah, that's happening. And then I had a friend call me, and she said, I was at a family funeral, and there must have been 20 people at the table, and I was talking about your book to everyone because I told them a story about, misplaced items and having them disappear and then having them reappear where they were all along. And every one of them said, yeah, that's happened to me. And she said, read that book.
Yeah. Well, and I know in your book you talk about how the rules have not changed, but the game has. And is that what you mean by that we're in this new dimension and basically, it's just a new way of looking at things?
Yes, it's precisely so. And one of the biggest shifts is, we've been preaching, the love message. You and I and lots of people have been preaching the love message for a long, long time. But here's a really good way to understand it. If you are buying a car from someone, in the old way, you wanted to get the very best price for the car, and you didn't really care whether the guy, got a good price or not. You just wanted to get the best price for yourself. In the new way, even if the guy that you're buying from is a stranger, you want them to feel like they got a fair price. You're not happy buying the car and taking them to the cleaners.
That makes sense.
And, we're doing this. Everybody around us is doing this. Look at, I don't watch TV to speak of, but I've seen Dr. Phil say, how's that working for you? He doesn't offer a judgment statement. People say whatever they say, and then he says, how is that working for you? Because that statement is non-pejorative. It's non-judgmental. It doesn't polarize people. Well, that was a dumb move, don't you think? See, the difference is dramatic. And so what's happening is all around people are shifting into the new way of looking at things. And because it's so dramatically different, because, in the old way, for example, the corporations were out to make the best profit for the shareholders. And in the new way, it's like, if you're not taking care of the earth, the shareholders don't want the profit.
Yeah.
And that's a brand new game. That's a brand new game.
That is a brand new game. It's a completely different paradigm.
Now, one of the things that I began to notice, for example, is because I'm so sensitive, I notice things. And then if I notice things and I don't understand why I'm noticing it, then I'll take it into meditation and ask, what's going on? And I began to notice that I was cringing when people would say certain things. So I started to ask in meditation, what's going on? And I was shown that certain words were so polarity-based that they would yank you back into third dimension. And that if you could consciously choose to replace those words with new words, you wouldn't be as likely to slip back into third dimension. And I'll give you an example in the modern world that has nothing to do with this, but it kind of shows how we change how we look at things. We used to call cars, second-hand cars, used cars. We now call them pre-owned. And pre-owned does not have that pejorative quality to it. And so certain words are so polarity-based that they yank us into third dimension whether we want to be there or not. Like right and wrong, or the best, or the truth. I can remember somebody telling me that they drove through this blinding snowstorm, and they came for the truth. And I burst out laughing and said, well, I hate to tell you this, but I don't do the truth. I do whatever is truth in the moment. But that truth implies that there might be a falsity that I would be holding the truth against.
I like that, and it makes sense because it's like, okay, well then if there's the truth, then something must be wrong.
That's right. And so one of the most common things that a person can do right away is change out the I have to. Because I have to implies that somebody else has power over me. I have to write this report for my boss. I have to go get the kids. I have to meet my friend for lunch. I have to get a present for my husband. All of these have to are implying that somebody else is holding the standard over us. When you change it, you empower yourself. Now, in the old game, the powers that are diminishing, wanted us to feel helpless, wanted us to feel dependent. And so have to became a common way of referring to things. But when we start to use words in a proactive way, like, I'm picking up my kids now because I like being on time, I've got a report that's due, I need to leave now to take care of that, what that does is puts me back in the driver's seat and puts me back in my power, and then when I command that I get help from the angels, or I stay in my power by saying I am healthy, I'm actually more powerful than if I'm saying I have to all the time and then saying I am healthy, because I've already given away my power half the time.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you see that happens very commonly with people, that they kind of give their power away?
I think everyone does by their language. I don't know anyone who doesn't use the word have to. I consciously try to avoid it, but even I occasionally hear myself saying have to, and I will correct myself. So it's jargon that we have so embraced, and that's, I think, the number one way we give away our power. We give away our power when we get hooked on watching TV, or watching a certain series on TV, or watching football games, or having to have a cup of coffee. There's a lot of ways we give away our power. And one of the things I began to realize is that mass consciousness is being heavily influenced by other energies that are attempting to hold us down. And when we unhook from that, we then can tell what's really going on, and we can feel comfort in our own connection with the divine. Because usually the reason people want to do these things that everybody else is doing is so they can feel they belong, or they can feel love. And when we feel the love of the divine within us, that need has been sated. So we aren't stuck seeking it, because we feel centered and in our hearts, and that's so full of love that the need for validation comes from God instead of from others.
And that's really the place we want to come from, is where we're getting validation from Source.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Well, I find it so fascinating. Your book is just like such a huge resource, and obviously we're not going to go through it all today. It would take hours to do that because it's just so packed with great information. What is, I did want you to kind of touch on the topic of fear a little bit, because it seems like that's something that with everything that's going on in our society and just people personally, it's a topic that seems to come up quite often. And so how does that relate to waking up in 5D?
Well, early on, I had some experiences with fear. When my first marriage ended and I was struggling with finances, I had an experience where I was filled with fear over a $50 bill from the utility company. And so in meditation, I asked, why am I so afraid of this bill? And side by side, in my mind's eye, next to the bill, was a cute jacket that I bought for $50 on sale, perfect for me, perfect size, perfect everything. And I realized that I wasn't taking care of myself in order to buy what turned out to be a luxury item. And the fear that I was feeling was because I was out of integrity with myself, because I wanted to be a good provider for myself and my family, but my behavior was not in alignment. In other words, I wasn't taking care of my family needs first. And so the fear was to remind me that I was out of line. So as I explored this concept, I began to understand that fear is a messenger, and it's telling you you're either out of integrity with your actions or your beliefs. So I say to people, if you have fear, change your belief or change your behavior. What that does then is allows you to get back in alignment with your beliefs and your actions. You know, that whole thing about congruency and integrity is that your thoughts and your actions and your words match. So that's the primary thing that people are dealing with fear. And then there's another layer of fear that I would call the projection of fear. So then there's almost like a grid that people tap into where they pull fear from this field of fear, and then the fear becomes fear for fear's sake, and they don't even have an attachment, they don't understand it, and that's a different kind of energy. But if you can catch yourself and choose to stay in alignment with yourself, and how do you change your belief or your behavior? When I was a teenager, or when I was in college actually, I was still trying to practice Catholicism. And, that was the age when people were dating and going over the line. And so I would go to confession, and struggled with the belief that the Catholic upbringing, that sex is for after marriage, and the experiences I was having. So my belief and my behavior were not in integrity. So then I chose to change my belief and decide that the church's teaching was not what I believed anymore. So that's changing your belief. And then changing your behaviors, saying you want to lose weight and still eating those cookies, that kind of thing. So those are the basic things about fear. And then when you start to have your own fear, if you don't address it, then you'll tap into what I would call mass consciousness fear, and there's lots of that around. So the number one thing to do is when a person has fear is to close their eyes and say to the fear, as if it's a person, I feel the fear, what is your message? And even if you're not intuitive, even if you're not, inclined to this, when you ask that question, I don't know anybody who hasn't gotten the answer. And it's always an eye-opener. But once you know that, then you can do something about it. And sometimes it's a simple matter of just changing your belief system and recognizing it's okay to abandon your belief system about such, whatever it was you used to believe. And that's an interesting thing, because a lot of us don't realize that we have a choice to hold on to the beliefs we were taught or not.
Well, and it's so powerful once, a person comes to that realization, like, gosh, I can move beyond this. Like, I don't have to be afraid of swimming or whatever the fear is. I can move beyond these fears.
Well, you bring up an interesting thing. One time I had a client who, she was not like one of us. She was a friend of somebody like us, and the friend kept saying, you need to have a session with Maureen. So she finally decided to have a session with me, and the first thing that happened when I opened up the Akashic Records is I could see her struggling with a life vest to get on her boat. So I was told to tell her, you don't have to worry. You're going to be fine, and you're going to be safe in your boat. And so the first thing out of her mouth was, how'd you know I had a boat? And of course my reaction was, well, I didn't know you had a boat, but I could see you have a boat in the records. And then at the end of the reading, she said, I don't even believe in reincarnation, but if I did, how did I die in the last lifetime? Now, at this point, I'm thinking, I don't know if I want to even tell her. But I checked in with my higher self, and I got that it was okay, so I told her. And, of course, she gasped. And then the record keeper said to her again, you must know that you chose to be around a boat, and you chose to be in this environment so that you could be near the water and not drown. You are not going to do that experience again. You already did it once.
How empowering.
Yeah, really.
Well, and it's interesting when people get this different information, especially when we talk about past lives, and just the fear that's taken away and the empowerment that they're left with is pretty profound.
Mm-hmm. And I want to say one more thing about fear. And I don't know that I've ever said this on the air to anyone, but there are people who are fearless. And they can be young people, in their 20s, or even younger. And if you are a parent of a child who is completely fearless, it's probably an ascended master. And the ascended masters that are in embodiment right now can tell when there is a problem or not. And so they will go into situations that other people would judge as fearsome and move through it and come out the other side just fine. And, if you're the parent of somebody like that, and I've had a lot of clients with kids like that, the advice that the record keepers give those parents is you must be using your higher self, and you must be checking in with your higher self on what to say and what to do, because you must parent them differently than you were parented. They need support. They need to be allowed to do what they do, and then just be reminded, that these are consequences that most people encounter. Doesn't mean they're going to encounter it, but these are consequences most people encounter. And go from there.
What great advice, because, if you're parenting a child who is fearless, I can only imagine how that would be.
It's pretty crazy. I've had people tell me, oh, thank God, I was really worried. And of course, this is not to say you're not supposed to, be concerned, but this is the one that's going to push the envelope and do things that you're just, oh, no, kind of thing,
So I was like, how'd they do that? Well, yeah. You touched on this a little bit, and I'd love for you to share with us. Yes, because I know that you do appointments for Akashic Records, and I can only imagine that you're super busy with your speaking engagements and the new books, that you probably don't book a whole lot of people for that.
That's true. People do have to make an appointment, and a lot of times, they're waiting 6 weeks to get in because of the schedule. Sometimes, and this is something it always is intriguing to me. Somebody calls or makes an appointment, and they roll right in. Like there's an opening, and they get in. And, the record keepers say, you are really tuned in because many of the people who are having sessions with Maureen are waiting, and you didn't have to wait at all. You were in within 48 hours. And that's them, and that's a validation for the client, because they're being, just like me, being told to call the guy. It's like the higher self is coming through and talk to her, get this appointment right now. And I've had people say to me, I've been thinking about making this appointment for 3 months, and all of a sudden I had this strong urge that I had to do it right now. And then they get me right then and there, And I always laugh because I I have a place in New York, and I come to New York not too often. I'm in San Diego most of the time when I'm not traveling. And my phone rings off the hook whenever I get to New York. It's like even if I don't announce it, there's like people that feel like they should be reaching for me at that point. And, who want to be, have time with me in New York. It's very funny.
Oh, I'm sure. I don't doubt that at all. I'm sure you have a ton of people that reach out to you to book time to do that, because I always find that so fascinating. And not everyone can do Akashic records like you do.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's really useful. I found those useful, and I always suggest our listeners book an appointment with you. Now, Maureen, where can people connect with you and be part of the community and learn more about, booking an appointment for a Akashic record if they're so lucky?
MaureenStGermain.com is my website, and I always have something free on the website. If you're listening in March, I'm not sure when this will air, so it might already be the end of March. We always have something free, and you can check the blog post. There's lots of information on the blog post, and that usually leads you to where the free download will be. That's probably the easiest thing to do. And then if somebody wants to have a session with me, the easiest thing to do is to go ahead and set up the appointment by buying it, and then the system allows them to pick a time. And, if they have like a triple emergency or something, they can always say that in their purchase, a special note. Can someone please call me? I'm like in dire straits or something. Mm-hmm. And then if they can be fit in, we do. We don't book my schedule so tightly that I wouldn't have room for anybody no matter what. And I told the staff one time, think of a dentist's office, anybody who's got a toothache, they get right in, and the rest of us are waiting 6 months for our next cleaning, so,
yeah,
like
emergency. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also, there's a team of people that I have trained that are also reading the Akashic Records, and they're also very, very good. And so that's Akashic Records International, and they are also listed on my website. So those people can also give a reading, and they are wonderful, wonderful, talented people.
Oh, how fabulous is that? Well, and real quick, what are some of the reasons that people would have you look at their Akashic records for them? Is it, if we talked about the overcoming fear part, what are some of the other reasons that you see?
One of the primary reasons is they're coming up on a decision, and they're moving in a certain direction, but they want to get a feel for if it's their best decision. Because truly, we have free will, and certainly whatever decision a person makes is going to be a good one, especially anybody who's listening to our show right now. You're not inclined to make a bad decision, but is it the one that's the highest and the best? And so that's one reason. Another reason is maybe it's their birthday or a special anniversary, and they're giving themselves a gift to have a greater understanding of their life. Another reason that people have a session is they're encountering certain kinds of difficulty, and they really need a bigger picture so they can, kind of get their arms around what's really happening, and also to have more compassion. Because we all know that if you have more information on the why of whatever it is that's going on, you have more compassion for the people involved and everything. If your best friend stands you up for lunch, they're your best friend. You're not going to be mad at them, but you're going to be a little bit hurt. But then if they call you and say, I was in a car accident, you go, oh my goodness. And any reserved, disappointment is evaporated in concern for them. So what if every time you went in the records, you found out the underlying reason why people were behaving the way they were? Your attitude towards them would be so loving, and that's not the end of it. When we learn to be loving towards our family, our friends, and our circle, we also extend it to ourselves. And, it's the self-forgiveness that's the last horizon.
I like that. That's so true.
So sometimes, we have, and almost always, when we are upset with a family member, it's because, well, if I were them, I would have done it this way. It just cracks me up because, well, you're not them. And, one time, for example, we were told a bunch of sisters were complaining about their brother, and it turns out that he wanted to be with a group of advanced souls, and that he wasn't as evolved as they were. What a concept. Then, instead of expecting him to behave the way they did, they had compassion, and they were more of a way-shower towards, you see what I mean? It's different. Your energy changes because you have greater compassion, and we're all going to have greater compassion for everybody anyway. And that's another thing that happens. At a certain point, you are so accustomed to giving compassion that you offer it even when you don't know, even when it's not deserved, at least by your observation, and so you're there. My first husband said something to me when we were very young in the marriage. I had no idea what he was talking about. And he said to me, you were rude to that waiter. How do you know his mother didn't die? And I thought at the time, what's that got to do with anything? He has a job to do here. And we all move on. But what a great statement to be in a place where you could extend compassion to everybody no matter what. And that, by the way, is one of the tools that I give people today, and that is, I'm asking for a day of heaven and earth for me and everyone I come in contact with. And so you're automatically creating the setup. So that even if they are having a bad day, even if they are being obnoxious to everybody else, they take one look at you and they're suddenly in that yummy, loving place, and then that, changes the setup for them for the rest of the day.
What a beautiful place to be in, and also to be the person that's helping to facilitate that.
Yeah, because we're all in this together, and that's another really important point that you've made. We are in this together, and like a family going on a picnic, we're not going until the last one of us is in the car and ready to go.
Isn't that true? Oh my goodness. Well, I have just so enjoyed spending this time with you, and not only talking about your book, Waking Up in 5D, which I highly suggest everyone go out and purchase their copy of that mine, but to also share your insights and wisdom with us in regards to the Akashic Records and what that means, so people have a better understanding, because I think a lot of times people get just a little confused by all that.
Thank you.
It's been such a pleasure to spend this time with you, Maureen. I'm glad we got to talk about your new book, Waking Up in 5D. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne. And remember, make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Moments with Marianne airs every Thursday, Friday, and Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Mountain Time. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.